Are we ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Great. Okay. My name is Kendra Lodewick, and I'm really happy to see everyone again. And also very excited to have our guest presenter here, JoAnne Robb, who is going to be thinking about kind of parent and support and how do we support our kids as parents and issues that caregivers and issues that we face. So I'm really excited for her session tonight. JoAnne has given, you may remember, she provided a presentation on Let Them Eat Cake last year, which was really great. And she also has a series of sessions that are available, especially to families with children with type 1. And I would like her to introduce that as another resource for all of us that can be really valuable. So JoAnne, why don't you introduce yourself and your services, and then and help us understand our goals tonight.
Okay, great. I'm going to actually start by sharing my screen because it's all like packed into my talk, and that'll just make it organized and easier for me. And one of the problems when I share my screen is that, hold on. Okay. So the talk that I'm giving tonight, I call Parenting for Resilience in a Life with T1D. And my goals for tonight are, I'm going to give a quick introduction to me. I'm going to define resilience, talk about love and limits. I'm going to go through some major tenets of how to encourage resilience for your child, how to foster that. We'll do some tool building, and this is a very small group, so I will say I need a volunteer, or we would all benefit from a volunteer. How about that? To work through one of the tools with a live example of something you're struggling with one of your type 1 kids in particular, but I'm fine to do a non-type 1 kid if that feels pressing. I'm going to provide a little info about Sweet Talk, which is my coaching business, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So I have 3 children. My 24-year-old was diagnosed with diabetes when he was 9, and my 15-year-old was diagnosed through TrialNet when she was 4, and I have a 20-year-old in the middle who is not diagnosed. I'm a psychotherapist in Oakland, California, and I have a focus on T1D in my practice, along with other things. And I'm an experienced diabetes coach with a business called Sweet Talk, diabetessweettalk.com, which provides lots of resources to the type 1 parent community. One thing I would love to kind of I will give a little more pitch at the end about my paid coaching courses, but I also want to let people know that I have a podcast and you can be on it with whatever question. It's a Q&A format, and you come on and we have a little therapy session and you ask the question. We're recording, but you don't have to, you can also be anonymous. And we think through different issues, and the podcast is called Sweet Talk. So you can look that up. So what is resilience, right? This is the dictionary definition. Sorry, the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. But what I want to think about is, where does it come from? Because I think in like lay parlance, we have this idea that resilience is something you're kind of born with, like it's inside of you. But the research shows actually that resilience arises through relationship. Right, which points to the fact, this is like one of my major tenets of everything I do in Sweet Talk and with supporting type 1 parents, is the most important thing is our relationship with our kids, right? That's how we foster and build resilience with them and for them with type 1, right? Is by keeping our relationship with them strong, right? Because once they internalize the strength of that relationship, that's what creates the idea of resilience. I think about parenting as being a 2-pronged task, right? There's love and there's limits. And I want to name that these are not opposite from each other. These are actually really in sync with each other. So the love part, everybody kind of gets. Hold on one second. The love part is being soft, being validating, really being understanding, being providing warm touch. All these things are love. Limits are not about being harsh. Limits are about being containing, right? And having a strong container is really, really important for our children to know where they're located. So what I like to talk about is a young kid, like a 2-year-old or 1.5-year-old or a 3-year-old, If they don't feel like you're in charge, it is actually really scary for them, right? And you kind of all know this, right? Because if you don't create good schedules for your young kids, they get more wild, because they're, in part because they don't know where the edges are and they're feeling for that. So kids do better, and I'll talk about this on the next slide, they do better with good containment. But limits are an important component of strong parenting. And both of these together is what creates the most sort of robust parenting we can provide. Okay, so this slide is based on a lot of research that was done in the 70s that's been replicated multiple times. So it basically stands now as truth, that there are different parenting styles and there are different outcomes based on the parenting style. So this yellow box on the bottom, we're going to ignore, because nobody who shows up to a parenting talk is neglectful. Like, I know for sure. The most effective parenting style, according to the research, is what we call authoritative. That's that upper blue box. It's high level of responsiveness and a high level of demandingness, right? Of setting limits. So it's the style of parenting that solves problems together with the child, that sets clear rules and boundaries and expectations, that has open communication and natural consequences. Like, that's what we're going for, right? So that's the combination, that juicy combination of love and limits. Authoritarian, that green box on the lower right, has a very high demandingness and low responsiveness. So it's very parent driven. It has a straight set of rules, and it operates on the idea of punishment. I'm actually thinking of somebody who took one of my courses who said, strict parents make sneaky kids. And I actually essentially agree with that. Authoritarian parenting has one-way communication with very little consideration of a child's social and emotional and behavioral needs. So they don't really think empathetically about where the kid is coming from. I save permissive for last because I think this is the pit that type 1 parents tend to fall into most. Permissive parents are highly responsive, and I think our parenting culture actually tends to be more permissive. Permissive parents are highly responsive, but have low demand, and are very child driven. They want to hear from the child about everything. They rarely give or reinforce rules, and they can overindulge the child to avoid conflict. The reason I think this is important to highlight, like, I don't know any of you, so I'm not accusing you of doing this badly. I am saying that it's a bit of a leaning, I believe, for type 1 parents, because we feel bad, right? We're already hurting our children every single day. We're poking them. We know what they're going through. We're waking them up in the night to put juice in their mouths. Like, we want to make it easier for them someplace, right? And so sometimes we're not holding good limits, which can make things feel out of control for them and for us too. So I just want to point that out. So how do we think about all of this in the context of type 1, right? How do we think about it? Because I think about type 1, and I really experience this with my clients, actually, as a therapist. I think about type 1 as an ongoing trauma. And I think of it as a lowercase t trauma, meaning it's not like, like those acute traumas that we think of as trauma, right? But it's an ongoing challenge that our kids have to face, that we have to face, right? That they're trying to process, and that, frankly, I have noticed in my clients that shifts over time, their relationship to it. But there's still an opportunity for us to build protections with our children, even though they're experiencing this ongoing trauma, right? It's unavoidable, right? But the question is, how do we get it to ride sidecar, both for our kids and for us, so that diabetes isn't in the centerpiece, so we create resilience and we create balance. So this is really important because, we as parents are thinking a lot about glycemic control. Our kids think about it a lot less. But the fact is, we need to think an equal amount about quality of life, right? Because glycemic control is very important. We're not letting go of that. If you work with me ever, you'll hear me say, don't unclip your seatbelt. I'm not suggesting that, but we need to really focus on the relationship with our children so that the social emotional piece is strong and healthy, and creating that balance. So I'm going to talk through all of these bullet points. I'm just, it's my outline. The first factor here is fostering connection. I've almost already talked about everything here, right? With this idea that relationship is the thing that helps build resilience. And that's obviously family, but it's also community. It's being here, right? It's sending your kids to camp, going with them to camp. I don't know, does Gales Creek have family camp? I don't really know. Yes. Okay, so it's family camp. I'm such a big advocate of family camp that every family camp should, like, I should own stock. If there were such a thing, I would have it. It's doing JDRF walks. It's having community through diabetes, but also not through diabetes, right? It's about having community in other spaces, if that's what's appropriate for you and your family, and showing your child how you advocate in those spaces around diabetes, right? Modeling that, but fostering lots of safety net and connection. The truth is, at the end of the day, you want your child to feel like there's more than just you or you and your spouse who can keep them safe. You want them to feel safe in lots of ways and places. You want to support their confidence. So I have a few different bullet points here. The first one is thinking about language. And with diabetes, I think this is particularly important because we tend to talk about good and bad numbers, good and bad. And we never, ever want to use that language if we can avoid it, right? Numbers aren't good or bad. They are neutral. They are data. They are in range and out of range, right? But we want to be focusing honestly on behavior and not on numbers. So if they have a good diabetes day, it's because they remember to dose, or they told you when they ate that piece of pizza that you didn't know about. It's not because their numbers were in range all day. There are a lot of reasons for that. You'll hear a little bit more about it later, but mostly you want their confidence to be about things they can control. And we know that we can't always control numbers with diabetes, right? So we don't want to shame them and make them feel bad about that. I have worked with clients who've had that message, and shaking the shame is really hard. We don't want that for our kids. We also want to be judicious with social media. Now, most of the people here have very young kids who hopefully are not on social media yet. But we want to be thoughtful in allowing it to be introduced. And the reason I feel most strongly about this is because there's a lot of sort of, I would call it propaganda on social media. So we need to be careful of this too, that you can have in-range numbers all the time, which is crazy pants. That's not real. I mean, the way I think about this is it might be possible that you would be spending all of your time doing just this. So you'd be living your life to do diabetes rather than doing diabetes to live your life. Again, I'm not suggesting you should unclip your diabetes seatbelt, but the idea of perfection is not a message we want to give our kids, right? There are going to be mistakes. They are going to make them. We are going to make them. And so we want to be careful about the social media messages they get about diabetes. We also want to consider body image because most of our kids, I didn't ask this at the beginning, but most of our kids are on pumps and CGMs, right? So they're kind of bionic. And that can be hard for many children, not for everybody. We want to be sensitive to our particular kids and how they react to it. And just to support the idea that bodies can have tech on it by doing things like going to camp. Right? Because everyone there has the same thing. And so it's one way to just normalize that difference. And you want to give kids lots of opportunities to succeed and to support their success, in particular with diabetes management, right? So following the lead of your child, largely. I hear a lot of questions from parents where they're worried, like, should my 8-year-old be doing X? And the answer is, do they want to? Right? Like, are they cueing you that they're interested in doing X with their diabetes management? If they are, great. Let them do it. Let them succeed at it. Give them even opportunities to fail at it, right? Which is an important part of the growth of success, right? Because your kid is going to say, oh, I think we should dose like this. And you think, no way. But if it's not going to be, it's not going to throw them wildly out of range, like they're not going to go crazy low, let them try. Right? You're giving them the opportunity to learn, and that's some of what they need to succeed. Another topic area is to support social competence. And really, I feel like all of these bullet points say the exact same thing, which is you want to teach advocacy. You want to teach them how to speak for themselves. And that is, when they're young children, how to be assertive with adults in a positive way. But all of this is about how to ask for help. And really, the best way to do that is to do that yourself. right? To be modeling yourself how to stand and do that. So I gave a new talk this year right before the school year started, or I guessed, because I serve people all over the country, called Beyond the 504. Again, if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get information about all these, and I'll likely do it again before the school year next year. But the whole thing is about like how to talk to people, right? How to advocate for yourself and your child, because that can be difficult. And so it's really important for us to learn how to do that effectively. So we're modeling that for our kids and helping them learn how to do it. Oh, and actually just one more point here, which I already said, but again, I'm going to say it again. We want our kids to feel like there's more than one person they can get help from, right? That it doesn't have to just be us, that there are people at school, that there are people at their friends' houses, all of these things, that the adults are safe. Okay, so we want to help teach problem solving, right? So this first point, understanding that it's okay to not be perfect and communicate that. So I referred to this earlier, but I want to talk about it again. First of all, I don't know, raise your hand, folks. How many of you have made mistakes in managing your child's diabetes? Yeah, all hands up. I can't see all of you, but yes, I've made so many mistakes, including the time where I took the syringe and walked over to my non-diabetic child to squeeze the back of her arm. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Lots of mistakes. I didn't give her the shot. That was the good news. So a few things to think about perfection. If you're communicating that perfection is important, first of all, your child is going to be much less likely to want to step in to try, because they feel like the bar is very high for what they're expected to do. But also importantly, and I interestingly didn't write the statistic down in my notes. It probably means I'd have to go research it, and I didn't want to. But there's a big fat book on my shelf that would tell me if I'd pick it up and look at it. There's research on the percentage of kids who lie to their parents, and it's astronomical. It's like 95%. I know it's in the 90s. I just have to look it up to find the number. The reason children lie to their parents is to keep the relationship with them intact. They don't want conflict. So if we are telling them that they have to be perfect, not by saying it, but in all the ways, by being hyper anxious about their out of range numbers, for example, then the message they get is that they cannot share with us. It is not speakable to us if they're out of range, if they don't do a good job. And so from very young, we want to communicate to them that, yeah, mistakes happen with diabetes. Yep, numbers are out of range. What are we going to do about that, right? That's the problem solving piece. Along the same line, we want to scaffold their learning and making it age appropriate. Again, if they're 8 and they don't want to do anything, that's fine. That's good. Expose them, talk about it as you do it, take them to camp once again. But if they want to try, great. Help them try. Give them the calculator so they can add up what they think the carb count is. Help teach them. Put sticky notes on things. Whatever it is that you creatively come up with to scaffold their learning. And then we need to honor their mental health. And I have 2 thoughts here. One is some children feel some embarrassment about having type 1 and the TAC, right? It's not negotiable for the adults in their life to know. Their teachers and the staff at school, those folks need to know. You don't need to negotiate there. You just clear, right? That's a limit. But if they don't want to tell their friends, that's okay. It might not be what we would prefer for them, but it's also okay. And we need to honor where their limits are while also encouraging growth, right? Like think growth zone. And if you have a choice, right, if you have the option your kid feels neutral, then definitely set the example about being clear and forward with it so that it's not something hidden. The other thing I want to talk about in honoring mental health is about burnout, right? I do think that's real. A lot of parents worry about it coming. Don't worry about it coming. When it comes, be responsive, right? That's what you can do to help your kid. So the story I have here is my 15-year-old was diagnosed at 4. I was so excited she had diabetes because it definitely meant she was as cool as her brother. And so she was ahead of the curve on everything, right? She did finger pricks early. She did everything really early. She changed her pump incredibly early. And then about a year ago, I started noticing that whenever her pump ran out of insulin, like a lot of times she'd be on shots. And I was like, what are you doing? And it took me a minute to figure out that she just was burned out. She didn't want to load them anymore. And so I took it back. And there are definitely days where I'm like, I can't, can you do it? And she's much more willing then, right? But it's really tracking where they are, paying attention, being responsive. Okay. And then we want to promote good decision making. This is just good parenting, right? You want to let your child have a voice, not, but with limits, right? That balance. But keeping it appropriate, setting limits where necessary, but asking them, what do they think? What's their opinion? What would they like? And if you can, you let them. If you can't, don't ask. That's fine too. But seeing where you can ask for that. Build on their successful experiences, which includes their making mistakes, right? So if they underdose for the plate of cookies, instead of getting upset, you just say, oh, so I guess for 3 cookies, maybe you need twice as much insulin next time. Let's try that, right? Promoting good food choices is something I threw in here for another time I did this talk. And I actually think it's a legitimate point here because there's so much baggage around food with type 1. And so if you want more about that, I have a free mini course called the Sweet Talk Snack Course. And if you go to my website, diabetessweettalk.com, you can sign up for it at the bottom. It's 6 emails, and it basically will talk you through what the risks are of eating disorders, why that's a higher risk in the type 1 population, and what we can do about it to help foster a positive relationship to food and eating. And that does not mean eating all low-carb food. It does not mean eating all healthy food. It means having a wide range of food choices and promoting a positive relationship to food. Okay, I'm going to switch over to tools. I have added a bunch of tools to this talk. The last one, validation. What time is it? Yeah. The last one is where I need the guinea pig if you want, because it will be really helpful for modeling the tool. But these are 4 tools you can use to help build positive relationship with your child, which, as we know now, leads to increased resilience. So the first one is curiosity. This one is, it seems obvious, but we don't do it nearly enough, right? This is wanting to understand what happened from their perspective. This is saying, like, what was that like for you? Or what happened there? Or I noticed this, what was going on? Or what made that hard for you? Or what happens when you go to dose and you forget, right? Like really understanding what happens for them. So we can think later about situations, like if you want to come up with the kinds of questions, we can do that during the Q&A. Praise, this seems obvious, but I want to hone in on it, right? It's not just expressing warm approval and admiration of something your child does, but it's being specific and genuine. So you don't want generic praise. You don't want to just say, you're such a great kid. I mean, you can sometimes if you feel that way, but really your focused praise is on something you're observing. And also for the kids who try to block out what you're saying, this is a way to kind of creep around that defense, right? So, and I've seen this happen with all age children, right? So when they're drawing the thing, you don't say, you're such a fine artist. You say, oh, I'm noticing how careful you are in selecting your colors, or you're being really careful in how you're drawing that butterfly, right? You're just noticing them. This is a form of praise that most children can tolerate and really can take in because it feels specific to them and very genuine. Mirroring active listening and reflection of your child's experience. This is very powerful. I don't do it nearly enough. But this is when your kid comes home and they say, I hate diabetes. Happens a lot, right? Or it happens often in the community. Some way or another, our child is communicating, I hate this, I'm done with this. And what our reaction tends to be is anxiety, right? We're like, what do I do to change that, right? We don't do anything. We just say back what we say. Oh, so you're really hating diabetes right now. Stop. Because generally, if you do that, you make room for them to say more. And again, you want that. You want to know what's happening inside for them. So these are the kind of sentence starters that will help with that. Okay, let's talk about validation. Let me talk about what validation is not. So it's not praising your child like in that glossy way, like you're the best. It's not giving them compliments. It is not even necessarily agreeing with them. So this is particularly a good tool when you're really in a face-off with a kid. And it's definitely not giving in to behavior that is unsafe or annoying or inappropriate. So validation is letting your kid know that their feelings or opinions are valid and worthwhile, and learning about, understanding, and expressing acceptance of your child's emotional experience, right? So this is the tool that is most helpful when your kid is frustrating and angering you, but it's also the one that's hardest to do when your child is frustrating and angering you, right? So when your kid is, I have a whole list here, they won't treat for lows, they won't follow through and dose, when you feel like they're sunk into depression about something, right? When they're really off track, this is when this tool is particularly important. It's always good. I've taught this and I've had people say, I could use this on my husband. I'm like, yes, it's good for everything. I'm a believer, right? So this can be hard because we get frightened, right, when their behaviors are off. And so it's really hard in those moments for us to sink in to like thinking about their experience. We just want to change it. So what I'm thinking about is, here's a scenario that seems possible to me, that you have an 8-year-old who's newishly diagnosed and they want to go to a slumber party and you are just not ready to make that happen, right? That feels super scary to you. And you're willing to like have them stay till 11 p.m., but you're feeling like you need to pick them up. I might challenge you on that, but I think that's a very real scenario. I certainly took me a long time to get comfortable for sleepovers. So you have an 8-year-old who's saying, Mom, but I want to, and it's okay, and I can do it. Let's make that, pretend this is real. I don't know what your experiences are with sleepovers. When I started with this game, there were no CGMs. So it was very different for me back then. So the first thing you want to do is you want to convey the understanding of their experience from their point of view, right? And there are a few steps to this, A and B. My favorite of these sentence starters is it makes sense that you, if you were to work with me as a therapist, you would hear me say that all the time. So I'd say, oh yeah, sweetie, no, it makes total sense that you want to go to that sleepover and you feel upset with me that I'm not wanting you to go. And then this is where normally we say what? Can someone tell me what we normally say? We say, yeah, it makes sense that you don't want to do your homework. What's the next word?
But
What? But, absolutely. But. And what we do when we put but there is we erase the entire thing that we just validated. So what this tool allows you to do is separate, right, the first part, the validating statement, from the end part, the solution. And in between, we put this step 1B, which is to demonstrate that you get it with sincerity in a way that reflects their positive intentions, vulnerable feelings, or attempts for relief from pain. And we do this with becauses. No buts, because we are emphasizing what we just said makes sense. So it makes sense that you feel upset that I'm saying no to that sleepover, because you really want to go and be with your friends, right? It's really important to you to be with your friend. And okay, let me back up here for 1 second. Sorry, I'm interrupting myself. You want these becauses to have a high poignancy level. These are not tossaways. These are you really thinking about what their experience is. So the first one I gave is a little bit of a tossaway because you want to be with your friends. Yes. But the second one is because you don't want diabetes to get in the way of you being normal like everyone else, right? And because you feel like it's taken you so far south, you wouldn't use that language with an 8-year-old, because it's made it so much more difficult for you to be like a normal kid anyway, that this really feels bad, right? Those are very poignant becauses. You are really hanging in there with your child's experience, okay? And then you move to all the things you already know how to do. You provide support, either emotional support, like it's going to be okay, not in this situation of this scenario, but if you have a kid who's depressed or struggling in school or struggling to dose or whatever it is, understanding, I hear you, I know you're doing the best you can right now, like you can read through these. Or practical support, right? We're going to make a plan, right? Or whatever it is, we're going to suggest a distraction. These are for a wide range of different problems that you might have. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to see, is there anybody who would be at all interested in being a guinea pig for doing a validation? Anyone who has a scenario with their type 1 kid that they feel like they're up against right now and they want help with a validation.
Our child's on a CGM and a pod now, so that's made it a whole new ball game, which has been lovely. But our biggest issue is getting him to eat his snacks throughout the school day, and also to enter his carbs. But that's less of an issue, because if he goes a little high, it's not a big deal. But we're more concerned about him going low, particularly on his bus ride home that's fairly long. And so we have a particular bus snack that he is supposed to eat technically before he even gets on the bus. But we can tell by his CGM if he hasn't eaten it, and we're texting him, and we eventually have to call him to remind him. Thoughts on how we could get that to go more smoothly and help him remember. Again, I don't know if that's the right scenario for what you're looking for here, but that's kind of the one thing we're challenged with.
Okay, so it's so interesting. These are all food related. So I feel like go get the Sweet Talk snack course. And I don't know, like Kendra and Rob, if you would agree with this, but for that, Angela, I'd be on the phone with my endo and be changing settings. So he's not going to go low on the bus and he doesn't have to eat. That's what I would recommend there, right? Like, don't make them eat if they don't want to. They have to all the time when they're low, right? So if we can just change settings around so that we can avoid those moments. Right. And I just looked up, you're 13 months in. So, you know, sometimes we have to learn how to be agile enough. Right. And believe me, I had a friend come to me once and be like, you need to change your son's settings. You're making it harder for him. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Yes, I am. Right. Like, we all sometimes need reminders. So that's my thought there.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have a different scenario when you have, let's say, a kid who, when they're low, they get kind of oppositional and they don't want to eat the thing that they absolutely have to eat. Now, that's actually tricky because there's like a mind shift that's probably happened for them. And it's not a moment that you get in that moment. The validation probably will do a whole lot of nothing. But later you can use the same tool, right? Like, you don't want to eat when you don't feel like eating. And that makes sense, right? Because who would want to do that kind of, does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah. Thankfully we don't have that issue. He's usually pretty good about eating when he needs to, but yeah.
Yeah. No, but it happened to me once where my son was just so angry about being diabetic that it was like a full face off as he's tanking. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. You know, it was scary. Any other ideas? You all can have access to the tool. Yeah, we have Leanne waving. With an 18-year-old, you're much more likely to need this at 18. Yes. You're muted though, Leanne.
I've had this it's recurred a couple of times, and I'm sure it's going to come up again. And it's hard to be validating about this, except to the extent of like, yes, we went through this when we were your age too. The 18-year-old who acknowledges that she wants to go to parties where there's drinking and acknowledges that she wants to drink while she's there. So, I mean, I think that's a safety concern for all 18-year-olds. Like, when I was 18-year-old and drank, no good came of it. And we've tried to be frank with her about that sort of universal concern for all 18-year-olds drinking. And then the additional layer of how do you manage your type 1 when you're impaired? So it has, I don't know if the validation works for this, but.
So I have a few thoughts here, and actually, because we're not jumping in with a strong thing to validate, I wish I had a better example, but I think you all have the idea of how to use it. I have a few thoughts. One is, if you find my podcast, I have a bunch of episodes where I interviewed a doctor who treats type 1 and substance. Those are his two specialties.
Okay.
And so we talk all about substance with type 1 and our type 1 kids. So there are 3 episodes because I did an initial one based on the question of a parent who came on, which is the basic format of my podcast. Is a parent comes on, asks a question, and I answer it. I do it live. Like I don't know generally what the question is before I start. But I knew in advance, so I asked him to come on. And so the 3 of us are talking through what her concerns are. And she had an 18-year-old, I think. And then I have 2 more interviews with him, 2 more episodes, one on drinking and one on other substances. So I'm going to encourage you to listen to that because he has a really lovely perspective. He actually is the doctor for camp here in the Northern California area.
Okay.
But it's a parenting decision, right? And there are ultimately what you decide to do about that scenario is a parenting decision. And if your parenting decision is, I'm not sending you, right? No. Then there is a validation to be had. So the validation is something like, and here's where I need your help, right? Because you know your kid. So it makes sense to me that you feel upset and angry, right? That you don't get to go to the party where there's alcohol. You tell me, Leanne, what are the causes? Like if you reach into her experience, what is she feeling and experiencing?
She sees that we seem to be old fashioned. She has friends whose parents co-sign. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. Parents who let their kids drink at home with the parents' consent. So it must be frustrating that she doesn't get to kind of experiment and try these things that her friends are doing at the same time.
Okay, and what is that like for her to be different in that way?
I think it resonates in a bigger way because she was diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 12 and at that time was very like, all I want is to be just like everybody else.
Okay, I'm taking notes. You could probably guess that. All right, so your validation, and I know most of you have younger kids, but I still think this same tool applies. Honestly, we're just not coming up with the brilliant example of when it happens. And I wish the last time I gave this talk live, there was definitely a parent who came forward with like a 9-year-old. I just can't remember what we talked about. So Leanne, your validation is, it makes sense that you feel upset with us and angry that we're saying no to you going to a party, right? Because what you want is to be like everybody else. And because diabetes already kind of derailed that for you. Like since you were 12 and diagnosed, you've felt like all I want is to be normal. And here we are setting this hard line, making it hard for you to be normal in the way you see other kids being normal. Right?
Okay.
That's your validation.
Okay.
I want to share my screen again and give you a quick pitch about Sweet Talk. So you know, like some of the work that I'm doing. Here we go. And what's available, because I have lots of things that are available. And if you get onto my newsletter, you're going to have access to all of those things. But I want to tell you about the Sweet Talk coaching course because it could be a really great fit for some of you. And if you're really invested in making type 1 more emotionally sustainable in your family and getting it out of the centerpiece of your life, then I feel like, coming to me is coming to the right place. I used to have 2 separate courses, but now I've actually combined them. So you have one course you buy with 2 tracks. And that means you get like all this information and it will all serve you well because the original course the first course is called After Diagnosis. And this is for parents whose kid was diagnosed in the last year. And we all know what that year is like, right? It's like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot of fear and anxiety. And I'm there kind of holding your hand through course material, right? Through structured course material that I've designed to help with that process. The second course is called Put Diabetes in Its Place. And this is for folks who are more veteran, right? You know how to bolus now, but there are all these other problems that come up, right? And Leanne is talking about them, right? The other problems we face with our type 1 kids that keep evolving and changing. And the reason I put them together is because even if you're at the beginning now, you're not going to keep being at the beginning. It's going to change. The curriculum is different in the 2 different courses. but they have a lot of overlap. And if you buy the package, you have all the curriculum in one place, so you have access to whatever you want. The first thing I do in all my courses, including my more advanced course, which you would take after this, is an exercise called Welcome to Holland, which is about mourning your healthy child, right? I think this is so real for us, and there's so little space for us as T1D parents to make room for our own emotional experience. And I also truly believe that we experience this differently depending on, and I'm doing this because I feel like it's a merry-go-round. Like we just cycle around to the same kind of a similar place, but it's like a merry-go-round on a spiral. Like it's slightly different every time depending on the developmental age of our child. There's information, there's course content on getting connected. This is a little more in that beginner course because I find that parents at the beginning, but not always only in the beginning, are really lonely in this job, right? And don't feel entitled to ask for what they need. And I want to help you do that and get connected. And here's a very important component is being flexible, which I know can feel really, really hard, especially when we want to rigidly do it right? But I believe that flexibility is a marker of all good mental health. And so the question is how to hold diabetes flexibly, even as we are doing this like almost impossible task all the time. What you get if you buy the course, so I've switched the course presentation. It used to be that I did like 6 weeks in a row, and I found that that did not work for parents, right? We are all way too busy to show up for 6 weeks in a row of courses. So what I've done is I've changed it so it has rolling start dates. Like you can start whenever you want and you just fold in. And if you buy the base course, you get all the robust course material that can be personalized to where you are. You get effective strategies to help you feel less stressed, tons of videos and exercises to structure the learning. And most importantly, 3 months of one-on-one asynchronous coaching about the diabetes issues that you're facing right now. So what that means is you have me in your back pocket. It's done asynchronously, but I'm right there helping you, and I'm very, very responsive to that. If you want to upgrade, you get 3 additional months, so 6 total months of asynchronous coaching, and then 6 months of Zoom meetings twice a month. So 1 in a morning time and 1 in an evening time, 2 meetings each month. You can come to as many or as few as you want. And something I call introvert office hours. So if you're like, I don't want to talk in the meeting, you just email me the question, I answer it, it gets posted in our group so that you can have access to it. What I'm doing right now is if you sign up today or through the end of the year, but it gets sillier the closer you get, your clock doesn't start on your coaching until January 1st. Because I know it's a busy time of year, but it's also a busy time of year where we sometimes need extra support with all the crazy food things and family things and travel things that come up with type 1. But I don't want you to feel like, but I can't make use of it. So this is what I'm doing. I also have a Gales Creek code that'll give you $100 off if you buy through the end of 2023. The cost of the whole base program is $395. And if you want 6 months of time and in-person Zoom, it's $750. If you have questions, you can always email me. And that's true of everything. Like I'm always happy to talk to folks, JoAnne@diabetessweettalk.com. And it's time for Q&A. So I can answer questions about the course or questions about the content or other questions about situations that you have. I'm happy to hear from you, whatever is coming up.
So our child has a school 2-night overnight trip in early May, and he will be almost 9 at the time and not quite 2 years out from diagnosis. And we're trying to figure out strategies for managing that where he's away without us. Like I said, with a CGM and a pod, and hopefully within cell phone range, so at least we can, call appropriate people if absolutely necessary. But thoughts on preparing him. I mean, we have obviously several months of training time, so to speak, but also emotionally, he's been to my mother's house for an overnight, and he's been to Gales Creek for the 4-day camp. But other than that, he hasn't been away from one of us. And I think we had clingy issues beforehand, but now we've got even bigger problems now.
So are you in public or private school?
Private.
And what is the school going to do?
That is a good question. So for better or worse, they do not take any federal funds. So that was a big struggle the first year was they didn't have a nurse on staff. So they do have a nurse this year. It took them 6+ months to find somebody. And we're still kind of working that out. Those details haven't been finalized. We did talk with his teacher a couple of days ago by chance and asked about this, and we're like, could you share meal plans with us or anything like that, and we can give carb counts and things like that. We've even talked about maybe going on vacation ourselves nearby because they're going to be down in Newport, and just being close by should anything major happen. But I want to make sure that we're doing our best to not go on field trips and things this year, as they're doing more of that day trips and such like that, because we don't want him to rely on us. We want him to gain his independence and feel that way. And so far, I think he's been okay with it. He would like us to be there because, again, between COVID and our introverted child who's very clingy to his parents, that was an issue beforehand that I think has just been exemplified by the type 1 diabetes in the last, year. But any strategies or thoughts on, like I said, how to build up his, resilience and independence for some of these things?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think the most important part of it, and you have to think about how you get to here, and I have some thoughts about it, is that you have to be really confident about his safety, right? Because if you're confident, then you are conveying your lack of nervousness to him in all the ways, right? And I'd be careful to not, okay. I've seen the ways parents manage this generically, like non-T1D parents, being overly anxious about what they think their kid can handle and creating a good amount of anxiety. But if you're really responding to your kid, like I've heard of parents who do the things that I think are really smart, where they'll like get photos of the place where the child will be staying. Like, I don't know what his anxiety is related to exactly. And what I feel like you're indicating is there's a diabetes component to it where he feels like only you can manage. So, or like he feels best if you're managing.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then I really want you to have a robust management plan that does not rely on him. He's too young.
Okay.
And I am seeing more and more parents who are asking their kids to do management because they have cell phones. But developmentally, he's not ready. And I really believe that, especially if you're getting that level of anxiety. So if that's you hire somebody to go, which is what we always did. We just paid some camp counselor. Robb's raising his hand. They're probably right. So talk to Robb. He knows some like college student who's jobless who would love to go to Newport and sleep next to your kid and make sure their numbers are in range. And I would be way less worried about highs, just as a parental stance, just like whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty lax about highs, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. Yeah, so you're not even communicating about like that, not to him. You're just like,
no, we've turned off his high alert. I'm like, no, he doesn't need to know about it.
Yeah.
He can't do anything about it.
Right. So you're just creating a lot of safety around lows. And you're communicating, you're going to have a great time, right? And this person, Sam, who we found, we're going to meet Sam in advance. If it's someone the school provides, then that's what you're going to partner with the school to find somebody to really be his point person. That's what I would do. Like, that's how I always did it as a parent until, I think my kids were in high school before they really went on their own. And I was nervous as all get out. So, because my daughter has enough attention problems that when she did it, it was a little scary. But that's what I would do. So it's two-pronged. I would get myself the support, make sure the support is there for me as a parent so I can breathe. And then I would be able to breathe all of that into him. Like, we're going to meet this. You're going to know what the safety plan is. I wouldn't use the word safety plan, but I would say we're going to meet this person. It's going to be so great. It's like you have your own special person and they'll be there to help you with your diabetes. However you can structure that, right? Whatever support you can get, that's like the end point. That's like the fantasy, but it might be something that's less than that. And then you're going to talk about what a great time he's going to have. Right. And if he gets nervous and express nervousness, you say, yep, I get that. That makes sense that you're a little nervous. It's always a stretch. We have to be in our stretch zone sometimes, and that can be hard. Right. But I wouldn't validate it in that long way, because you don't want to feed it a lot of energy. You want to acknowledge it and move on. Right. It's there. I get it. Like if he gets really hysterical, you're going to have to do something different. But otherwise, you want to just touch it and move away from it. Make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. Are there questions? I feel like we have time for one more. We're a little over an hour. I don't want to make you guys stay here forever.
Yeah. So our diagnosed kiddo is 8. And we have a daughter who turns 11 in another week, and we are awaiting her trial net. Her trial net results. But I mean, I think for anybody who has at least one diagnosed and at least one not diagnosed, that thought is probably always there. But she has a lot of feelings. She's a very emotional kid. She just feels a lot of feelings. So I kind of just feel like I definitely understand like the validation and all that, but how do you handle it? Sorry. How do you handle it when like you feel that strong of grief?
Yep. Yep. Well, I have a bunch of answers, but the first one is you have to handle yourself first. You're the adult. And so the unfortunate thing about that is our task is to keep ourselves the appropriate level of contained, which does not mean that we don't ever show our children our feelings. But in this case, you don't show her your feelings, and you have to find people, right? You go to someone like Kendra, who has 3 diagnoses, or me with 2. You find the people, right, who've been through it and who've survived it and whose kids are more or less thriving. Kendra, we don't know each other. So, you know, my 15-year-old is more or less thriving. My 24-year-old is doing great. So you find us and you talk to us and you process with a lot of people alongside of what you're helping support her with, right? Because those feelings should not enter. They need to be not on her, right?
Yeah.
And they make a ton of sense. Honestly, my first diagnosis, I was way less weepy than my second diagnosis, where I fell apart in a yoga class, literally just sobbing in yoga. It was horrible. So, you know, because there's room, we understand what it means in a different way, and we don't have to learn how to manage it, right? This is my experience. I don't know what Kendra's has been, but mine was like all the management piece was taken care of. So there was a lot more room for the emotional stuff, right? And so it is scary. So the second answer to your question is she anxious about it, or is this you projecting onto her?
Oh, she is she's very anxious about it. I mean, she also already has a lot of like medical related phobias. And we have a lot of issues around food that we're already dealing with. So I'm like, I don't know how we would, you know, like the sneaking food and that kind of thing. Like we're there already, and we're not even worried about insulin. Okay, go see Dad.
So I would get the Sweet Talk snack course.
Yeah, I already signed up.
Okay, great. Because I think that it really applies. Like I built it off. I have a lot of eating disorder training, and I built it off of an eating disorder talk, and then I folded in the diabetes piece. So the information is basically sound advice for parenting about creating positive relationship to food. So if your 11-year-old is sneaking food, I don't know if that's what you're talking about. You really need to think about your relationship to food in the house. And I'm be curious what Kendra's answer to this is, but my answer is you're very matter of fact. You say, if it comes, sweetheart, we're going to deal with it. We know so much. We're going to get all the resources and we're going to take care of it. Right now, let's wait and see what happens. Right? Let's not borrow worry. Let's wait.
Yeah.
Could be that you're fine. There's a better than not chance. I mean, her chance is higher, but it's still, she has
Lower than 50%. Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Like, her chance is quite good that she's going to be fine. That doesn't mean we can guarantee it, but we can say, we're just not going to borrow worry. And you'd be matter of fact. And if it comes, it sounds like you might want to get extra support, right? Like she might need some exposure therapy to deal with the idea of the medical piece, right? Because she's going to get it anyway. She's not going to have a choice, but she might deserve some additional support. Since you're not going to be flooded with learning how to do it, you have the room to get her extra resources.
Okay, great.
That's what I think. I also have a podcast episode on a parent who was deciding whether or not to do TrialNet. It's an older one, so you have to scroll back to see, but it might be interesting to listen to. I don't know if it would be helpful or not. I can't remember enough about it. Kendra, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, we didn't do TrialNet with either of any of our kids because they came in pretty short succession, and our second diagnosis, he identified it himself so early on, and then the third one was also easily spotted just because once so I don't have anything to add about sort of the waiting period and borrowing that worry, but I would say that I think you'll be surprised, and I think it sounds like I know that there's a lot of dynamics that you and your family and your daughter will have to go through, but there will also be some solidarity that come out of it for all of you, and that's something that that she may not realize or feel yet, and you may not realize or feel yet, but not that you can sugarcoat that it's going to be great, but she does know, there's, you don't want to use the well, what's, sometimes not related to this, you do when I'm stressed about things, I think, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I think of the worst thing, and I think of how that's doable. And so here, her worst thing is something that is known to you all and something that is doable, and her brother's doing it, and she will surprise herself with how strong she is, but I know that that's hard to prepare yourself and prepare her for. So I don't have any advance notice, but I do know that that she can do it, and you will all do it once you get there, if you get there, and you may not get there.
I love that. Thank you, Kendra. I think Kendra, what order were your children diagnosed?
They were diagnosed in order of the oldest first, then the second, then the third, but they were 5, 8, and 4 at their ages of diagnosis. So
yeah, I think one of the differences that is significant, you and I have the same, which is our older child was diagnosed first, right, is that I suspect there'd be less of a feeling of solidarity. I totally agree about solidarity.
Yeah.
My daughter thought she was super cool because she was like her older brother. It's going to be a little less that way for you, Adrian, because it's your older child being diagnosed after you're younger. So I think there'll be a little less, but I do think there's something really powerful in the house where everybody is experiencing the same. And so, and I do think you will surprise yourself. It's a little like having a second baby, where it's just not the same level of stress. You're stressed about different things. You're actually still stressed about your toddler instead of being stressed about the new baby. It's just a different experience because you kind of know what you're doing. Yeah. Unless there's something pressing, I think I should let all of you go to bed. Or to watch TV or whatever you do before bed. But thank you very much for being here. Please reach out to me if you have anything else I can help or be of assistance with. It was a delight to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. It was great to have you again.
Thanks, Kendra.